Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar, which is the second in a series that Weston Chamber of Commerce are putting on. Today's, as you will gather, is hgkc, and I will leave Peter and James to introduce themselves, but just to say thank you to them for agreeing to join us in this, and that they bring with them a wealth of business experience that we can all benefit from, whether or not we're freelance or running a small limited company or a bigger limited company. So I will hand over to Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. I'm Peter Quintana. hgkc was a company we formed 7 years ago to provide practical business advice to enable clients who are typically leading small and medium-sized businesses, pretty much like yours, to overcome the challenges they're facing. My goodness, aren't they facing some challenges right now? Not the least of them being planning, which is what we're going to be talking about today. By way of background, I was independent sole trader focusing on business coaching and performance improvement for a few years before hgkc, and prior to that I had a long career in IT and project management and change internationally. I'm joined by James Short. So James, do you want to give a quick thumbnail of yourself?
Yeah, thank you. My former life was in the military, and I ended up for the last 10 years or so planning at the strategic level, predominantly with NATO, and that meant being sent off to the Balkans or Iraq or Afghanistan and managing a project and delivering an output. And so when I left the military, I wanted to do something totally different. So I set up my own company, essentially doing what hgkc do, only I have to admit they do it a little bit better than we ever did. But anyway, we ran that successfully through the 2008 financial crisis. Then my wife decided that we were going to sail around the world. So I took a year's sabbatical that turned into a 5-year liveaboard. Anyway, we sold the boat last year, and I was encouraged out of retirement for a third time to join Peter and Kim, which I really love doing because I'm passionate about what they do and the advice that they offer.
Excellent, and good to have you on board, no pun intended. In this webinar, we're going to be talking about the challenges of planning in uncertain times, why we believe at hgkc that it's critical that you plan, and offering you some tips on how to do it. And as I said earlier, these are complex times. People are becoming comfortable with digital communication like this. I spend a lot of my day in Zoom calls using various tools, collaboration tools with our clients and contacts now, and I'm sure most of you do as well. Remote working, there's reduced social interaction. This is becoming the norm, but some people are finding this quite difficult. But as we emerge from lockdown, slowly, maybe one step forward, 2 steps back sometimes, recession's looming. There's unemployment, and it's already risen quite substantially. There's heightened competitions from those companies that have moved quickly to embrace some new technologies. And on top of all of that, there's a bit of political unrest potentially on the horizon. We don't know what's going to be happening in the US when election comes round. There's still a US-China trade war, as far as I know. I haven't heard very much about it recently. And of course, we have the perennial Brexit no deal threat looming on the horizon. But beyond that, what if there is no vaccine? What if we go back to a full lockdown? What do you think is the long-term impact on our society? What will we do with all that vacated office space and closed shops in our urban centres? So these are quite difficult challenges, I think. But there is, as there always is in circumstances like this, opportunity. People and businesses are starting to do things differently. There's greater social responsibility, I think. There's certainly less wasted travel time. My car hardly moves off the drive now. There's more efficient meeting practices. I think there's improved work-life balance, even if you have been coping with homeschooling over the last few months. There's more time for parenting. I think there's also a greater sense of fairness out there. And businesses like ours and yours are beginning to reassess what's important. And that's where the opportunities lie, I think. So from my perspective, and I am a business owner, I don't think that I can just sit back. I need to think about business continuity. I need to think about the people I work alongside, whether we're going to recruit people, how we're going to develop them in these circumstances. I need to think about whether I'm going to be doing all of my business online now, or some part online and some face-to-face still. I need to be thinking about my target market. Does it actually still exist? And I need to think about whether I need to create new products and services. And just to illustrate that, I was talking on Friday to a client of ours who are in the event sector. Now they, I'm sure, as you understand, have been demolished for some of them. They've lost almost everything that they were doing. And this company, they're venue finders, so you can imagine what the impact on them has been. But yet the MD there told me that he thought September was the best month that they'd had. They're going to wind up this year with more money in the bank than they started. And the way he's done that is started to think about the kind of events that he gets involved in planning. And now they're planning and helping their clients plan hybrid events, events that are partially online and partially in the real world, or all online even. So everywhere there is opportunity. So why plan? Well, if you're content with survival, then, you know, planning might not be something that you want to do a great deal of. But I've always believed that if you're not planning, you're not moving forward. And if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. And therefore, you're not really even surviving. So if I want our business to survive, we need to plan. Now, effective planning in times of uncertainty gives you a real sense of business direction. It can provide focus within the business, which you wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. It allows you to stay in control, because sometimes it feels really, really hard. It doesn't feel like you're in control at all when things are changing as fast as they are. But I think most importantly, it provides that platform for continuity and growth. But I can imagine what you're all thinking. How on earth can you plan? Because even if the pandemic didn't disrupt anything major, we've really no idea what's going to happen at the end of this month, let alone next year. But let's just pause for a moment. This is really not the first time we've been in a situation like this. Okay, the convergence of various different things might be slightly different, but what about last year, pre-transition agreement? That felt pretty uncertain, didn't it? And what about 2016, pre-referendum? That felt pretty uncertain. I remember doing a survey pre-referendum asking people if they got plans for what was coming afterwards, whether it was a yes or no vote. And everybody said, how can I possibly plan? I don't know what the referendum result's going to be. What about 2008 and the financial crash? And 2010 when we hung Parliament? So we have history here. And that's not just in this country. Globally, we've had a history of uncertain times. I think ever since I started out in my career in IT, I've been being told that things have never changed so fast. And I think that's true. So you've got a plan. But we are in times of uncertainty. And I think the key thing to hang on to here is actually you're not powerless in the face of uncertainty. The way you plan is going to be slightly different. James is going to go into some detail in a moment, but here's 5 guidelines. First off, you need to think about what's really important to you. Before you make any decisions or write down any plans, make sure you understand why you want to make them. Be sure that your underlying reasons for planning or actions will still make sense under the current conditions. And traditionally, planning tends to be medium to long term. With our clients, we typically try to work over an 18-month or 3-year time horizon because it's difficult to see beyond that and doesn't make a great deal of sense shorter than that. But now, when things are changing so fast, maybe you're planning for next week. You know, we have a rule of 6 right now. What's it going to be next week or the week after? It could have changed already, couldn't it? So there's no reason why you can't have short-term plans. Historically, fast-moving businesses have always planned 90 days, always, because things are moving so quickly. So you've got to take that kind of mindset, really. And you need to ask, what can you do? Because it's inevitable that some of the plans you make won't succeed. Ideas that look promising last month might be untenable by next month. Instead of allowing this to bring you to a halt, you've got to pause and say, okay, if I can't do that, what can I do? And the 80-20 rule, we all know this. It's okay to make a plan, give it your best shot, and if it doesn't work, throw it out and make a new one. That's absolutely fine. We're all business owners. We can do that. We can make those decisions. And to recognize actually that good enough is enough. Sometimes, and I've been guilty of this, as you try and make sure that what you do is absolutely spot on. It doesn't need to be that, really. And then finally, before I hand over to James, it might feel like every choice you're making is about facing up to some kind of emergency. But you can't operate under emergency conditions all the time. It's just not sustainable. So just like a marathon runner, you've got to pace yourself. I've run some marathons, and if I've always remembered when I've started off too fast, I've been in a really bad shape by the time I've got to the end. So, okay, let's hand over now to James, who's going to take you through some of the real nitty gritty of this and get down to actually what you've really got to do.
Thank you, Peter, very much. Many of you will ask yourself, how do I do this? I just can't do it. I don't even know how to start. Well, a lot of what I'm talking about is something that I have actually put into practice, and in difficult times and under conditions when somebody's trying to kill me at the same time as I'm trying to actually carry out this great plan of mine. And also the fact that people who've been, if you like, under my command in the military are relying on me to get it right because their lives are at risk. So believe me, what I am saying is based on first-hand experience. And one of the acronyms that we always used in the military were the 4 Ds, how to get started. And this is a mindset. And I would really, really encourage people to get into this mindset. The 4 Ds are decide, divide, delegate, and deliver. Decisions are vital. Indecision is worse than a wrong decision. I cannot say that enough. You can recover from a mistake. You can't recover from indecision. It's impossible. So in terms of customers, you need to look at your customer base and say, each customer is different, so treat everything separately, but have a major review. And out of that will come conclusions, the what ifs. And then, of course, you'll say, oh, well, I can't do it now because there's too much to do. Well, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So with innovative actions, because I'm going to talk a lot about innovation, you have to divide the actions that you can see into bite-sized chunks. And then, of course, there's a business of delegation. And people will say, well, in the military, it's easy, or in a big company, it's easy. You just delegate to one of the subordinates. And actually, that's true. But even in a sole trader organization, there are people who support you, help you, your accountant, your bookkeeper, your lawyer, your banker, whoever it might be. They are people who you can delegate actions to help you. And of course, when you delegate, it's got to be crystal clear. And again, this is something I'll bang on about, the importance of communication. And to each action, there's got to be a who does it, by when, and with what resources. And resources aren't just money. I mean, the main factor in resources, of course, is time. And then, of course, you have to deliver, because there's no point in having a wonderful plan. It looks great. It's even on paper, and nobody delivers it. So how do you do that? Well, we'll come on to talk about that because you create a communications plan. And that really tells everyone connected to you how to get it done. So how do we do this? Well, let's take any company, any situation. There is a future environment. It's uncertain. However, you, in your own way and with your own expertise, because business leaders aren't business leaders for want of lack of a driving force which gets them selling whatever their product is. So they have had, once upon a time, a vision. Well, now, more importantly than ever, you have to have a new vision for your company, taking into account what you do know, and I'll come on to uncertainties in a moment, but there is this vision, and everybody around you knows that vision and understands it. I used to work with General Dynamics in Detroit, and when you went into the marbled halls, and it was very splendid, there, absolutely 3 stories up was their vision. So all the workers every day walked in and saw the vision. So they understood it. They understood what they were doing and what part they were playing, because it was there right in their faces. Then there's the next thing about innovation. You have to have innovative ideas because we are in circumstances that require that. And if you sit back and do today what you did yesterday, you cannot expect a different result tomorrow. That's my favorite mantra. If you do today what you did yesterday, you cannot expect a different result tomorrow. So innovation is the key to that. Blue sky thinking, thinking out of the box, whatever it is, there have to be innovative ideas, and they're there, they're in your head. What you've got to do is get them out and on paper and passed on to your team. And this requires capabilities. Have you got the right capabilities? If not, then you have to go and get them. If you've got somebody who purports to have the right capabilities and doesn't have them, well, oh, by the way, hard times, you know, you've got to change your team around. In this new way of you doing business with what you want to do to deliver your vision, you have to have a concept, and that concept needs to develop. And in a way, the experiment and implementation follow on quite closely after concept development. And the key issues in concept are first and foremost people. People sell to people, people around you deliver. So people are absolutely the most important. And that's why the leadership element comes on. I could spend hours talking about the leadership in this context, but I won't today. But concept development is absolutely vital. So people, money, and oh, by the way, you have to tell people what you're doing. They don't have a crystal ball. So marketing is absolutely vital. And I might say, and I'll choose my words carefully. There are marketers and marketers, and marketing is somewhat like selling snake oil in times and places. So you've got to choose very carefully the marketing medium, message, etc. And I'll come on to that in a moment. So you've got your concept, and then you need to experiment. Are you going to get it right all the time? No. Very, very often you get it wrong. But that is not necessarily catastrophic. Of course, it can be, and in which case you go bankrupt. But what you do is gently, gently try it out, test and adjust. And if something's wrong, then change it. And you do this with your team. And I must admit, from the hgkc point of view, what we would like to do is to reach out to those managing directors and CEOs who genuinely understand that they don't have all the answers. And actually, it's quite often useful to bounce your ideas off an external source, a wise sounding board, and test and adjust your concepts, experiment with them, and then deliver. And then we come back to the implementation piece, which is delivery. And it's all about change management. If we didn't have any of this COVID crisis stuff around, and you were told, you worked in a corporate environment, you were told by your boss, right, we're going to have a change management exercise. Everybody would say, right, okay, we'll produce a Gantt chart and da-da-da-da, and off we go. It's not a problem. But occasionally, when you have crises of this magnitude, people get frozen in the headlights. But if you take this reframing for the future idea and work around it, and you might have to go around it once or twice or three times. Certainly in my military career, and I ended up relatively senior, and I had to come up with a plan. If it didn't work, we had to adjust. We absolutely did. And you've got to carry your team with you and not appear to be a failure because you've got something wrong. And that's where the communication piece comes in. So there are uncertainties. And the fact is, by writing them down, it triggers the brain into thinking up what we used to call branches and sequels. These are issues that you write this down and said, oopsie, what happened if this was the case? Or that was the case. And of course, the only reason that you're going to know how it's going to impact you is if you have some metrics. And so you have to agree measures of progress. And this can and should allow for the unexpected. And you say, oh, that's impossible. Try it. Believe me, it is not impossible. You might have to revise your metrics. And the way to make sure that you are on track is to always question yourself, is my outcome still valid? Is my vision still valid? Is this the direction my company is still going in and still wants to go in? If yes, then continue. If no, then go and revisit the reframing the future issue and look to see whether it's concept, people, money, whatever. Revisit and rework and be brave about it, because everybody understands that it's almost impossible to do anything without making a mistake. But I always believe in encouraging people to work for a carrot rather than under a big stick. But you've got to accept that if somebody keeps making a mistake, then they are going to sink the whole business. And that, of course, cannot be allowed to happen. And how do you make sure that you've covered all the bases? Scenario planning. And you'll say, well, I don't have time to do this. But actually, in many cases, you have to make the time to do it because you cannot afford not to do it. In the military, we called it wargaming or red teaming. You create the best and worst case scenario and say, right, let's aim for the best and prepare for the worst. And we're going to be somewhere in the middle. And in that middle is opportunity. And the last sort of phrase is be bold, but not reckless. Have confidence. You wouldn't be in business as a business owner if you didn't have confidence and you didn't have good ideas, or you wouldn't stay in business very long. So here we are in business, facing a crisis, planning for uncertainty. So be bold, be confident in your own ability to get things done. So an action plan. The key is to set objectives, have goals, call them targets, goals, whatever you want, breaking the objectives down into bite-sized actions that people can do, and then having the action column which says who's going to do what, by when, with what resources, and then the measurement of success. So this is something that we use in hgkc, we're using with clients. I've used it in a charity that I was chair of, etc., etc. You modify it to fit your own business because every business is different. But by having an action plan that is reviewed frequently, and certainly on military operations, we used to do this every week, every single week for half an hour. This is the actions. Are we there? Do we need to change the goals? Do we need to change the objectives? If we had to change the vision, then that was a bigger exercise, but sometimes it happens. And of course, you had to talk about it. And here I'm straying into marketing speak, and I am not a marketeer, but what I am is somebody who can deliver a plan. And in order to do that, you have to have messages going out to cover the following areas, making somebody aware of what's on offer. Do they understand what you offer? And the two are not the same thing. And then you have to convince them that they need your product. So there are three distinct areas. And believe me, the messaging for those three areas must be different. And you might, in this day and age, use a different medium. And there's a plethora of mediums around. And so whether it's social media or the print press or LinkedIn or whatever, you decide for which one of those categories, awareness, comprehension, conviction, you are going to deliver that specific message to that specific target audience. Are there any silver bullets? I don't believe there are, actually, because there are always options. And very rarely is there a silver bullet that's going to solve every issue for every company. It just doesn't happen. This is where the leadership piece comes in. And the leader has got to think outside the box. Be that person who takes people with them and shows them a new way of doing business, even in difficult times. And that might need you to consider and evaluate new markets, new suppliers, new products, going in a different direction, whatever it might be. Every company is different. But you also need to think through how this is done in terms of collaboration and competition. In our Evo Business Club, we were looking at collaboration. Very important in this particular time. I mean, it's far better, in my view, to have a little bit of something rather than a lot of nothing. And that might require you to talk to one of your competitors because they're in the same boat. So it's better for you to team up and collaborate than both of you go down the tube, for example. It is worth considering, but collaboration is absolutely vital, especially now when there are so many uncertainties ahead. And then you've got to decide, what is the stop line? What is the crisis scenario? I mean, is it you selling your company or exiting, or are you actually going to acquire another company? Say, right, this is it. Now is the time to acquire something else and grow bigger, because there are opportunities. If somebody is failing, you can pick up something for a bargain. And let's be absolutely frank about this. It's what happens. There are always options. So those options need to be considered. And going back to the reframing, if you have new options, then have a quick whiz round the reframing the future scenario planning and see what comes up at the end. So My last word, you have to communicate within your own team and externally. Don't assume that people understand what you're doing. And you know, how many people have been to online networks during this lockdown period, and you hear somebody talking about their company, you think, what does he actually do or she actually do? I don't really understand it. Okay, they're in media marketing, but what's their differentiator? What's their USP? What's their value proposition? Communication, clear communication is absolutely essential. Question, Tracy.
Yeah, so how important is it to really write it down, James, rather than just having it in your head? And if you do write it down, how often should you review it?
That's a very important question, Tracy, because I mean, I would say, and many people have heard me say this, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. And of course, it changes. If you write it down, it is there on paper. That's why that action plan doesn't matter whether you change the boxes or whatever. But if it's written down in such a way that it can be readily reviewed, and certainly when I did my sort of big NATO change management exercise, we reviewed that on a monthly basis. And remember, I was working with 11 different nations, and there was no way I could give them an order. So it was called the name and shame chart by us internally, because somebody's name was there and there was an action against it and a time. And if they didn't do it, we say, oh, goodness gracious, hasn't that been done? And this, you know, Italian or Spaniard would have to say, oh, well, you know, off they go. So it's absolutely vital it's written down. And it's not that difficult. I tell a story sometimes. In the military, they have a thing called staff college, which is their sort of middle management. It prepares you to be a managing director, if you like. And there you're given 3 hours and a stack of paper that's about a foot high to decide on an invasion plan for a hypothetical island. And this, you have to consider the economic situation, the population, who's on whose side, the administration, you name it. And you have to produce a plan in 3 hours. Very, very complex. And that plan's got to make sense. So it is doable, believe me, because you focus on what is important. Mm. You know, in your own business, the important issues, will focus on them. And you'll find that once you gain momentum in this planning process, it's like a snowball running down the hill. It gains momentum and you'll find it becomes easier. So the first bit's probably a little bit tricky and you've got to engage your brain and then write it down. But writing down is very important.
There's a psychological element to this as well, that what gets written down gets done. So there's almost like an additional level of commitment if you actually write it down. And as to frequency, Tracy, it depends what it is that you're doing, really. At times like this, you might be reviewing that plan weekly. At normal times, or in projects that are perhaps over a longer horizon with less confusion or chaos on the way, you might review it monthly.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, I'm thinking of something. I'm thinking back to my days in corporate, and James, you were saying the leader has to take people with them. What if you're working in an organisation where the leader is not doing that? Is there something that you can do from the next level down to persuade a leader that they should be doing more than they're doing?
Yeah, get them to talk to hgkc. No, seriously. I mean, it's very, very difficult when that happens. And okay, to me personally, it has not happened because I listen and I go around and you talk to people. When I was in the military and I had an organization, I can't talk to all 5,000 people every day, but certainly you make yourself available. And what we used to call it was walking around the tank park. You walk around and talk to everybody. And you'll find that the most successful leaders do this. They go and walk the shop floor. Or you communicate. You have your water cooler moment on Zoom and call everybody in with no particular agenda, just with a cup of coffee, just to sort of mull over, you know, how's everybody getting on? How are the kids? What's happening at school? You know, who's not going on holiday or where's their staycation? And that sort of thing. And it's communication. So, I mean, you know, if a leader is not doing what he's meant to do, you have to communicate. And providing they see it as not a mutiny and not a sort of a challenge to their particular position, there are ways to do it. I mean, There was an English author who wrote a book, World War One, called The Indirect Approach. And he'd seen the carnage that happened in World War One and said, look, when you do face a situation like that, there is a better way to do it. My point I'm making is there's indirect subliminal approach that you can make to get a leader to understand that actually all isn't right in their church. And therefore, through listening or through some form of gentle communication, you can make them understand there is a better way to do it. And oh, by the way, we're not a threat to your particular position of leadership.
There's a great quote from an American businessman called S. Truett Cathy. He says, a business, successful or not, is merely a reflection of the character of its leadership. I think that's very true. We're working at the moment very closely with an organisation called Engagement Multiplier. They've got this employee engagement platform, which is a 90-day cycle of benchmark surveys for employees, or employed and contract. And we've got 2 or 3 clients that have adopted this. One of the surveys that you can run is what they call the leadership perception gap. So there's a self-reflection scorecard. So you can ask leaders to score themselves on 7 different categories. And then you get the business owners to score the leaders and the rest of the workforce to score the leaders. And the difference between those scores is the perception gap. And that's really, really powerful. But the underlying message here is sometimes the results you get from running things like this could be ugly. But actually, it's better to know than not. Ignorance at the end of the day is not a strategy. Jason, were you unmuting with a question there?
I guess a question for both of you guys of your experience at the moment. I've worked with a lot of kind of small entrepreneurial businesses in the past, and getting business leaders to commit to written plans has always been difficult because they see that as kind of shackling their creativity. Are you finding that business leaders are more open to that at the moment? Because actually what they've realized is that without something to fall back on, actually when it does get really, really tough and they're perhaps not in control of the flex that's happening around them, and they're not really in control of the issues they're having to respond to, are they more or less inclined to listen to the ideas about planning?
Well, business leaders working with us are listening to that because they're planning, and actually if they're not planning, we're probably not working with them, because we can't work with a client that refuses to plan. But I think as a business owner myself, because I am, how do I maintain business continuity, develop my people, grow over the long term? If you ask those questions of your clients and they can't answer them, then your response to that is you need a plan to help you to understand how you're going to do that. It is difficult, and I know exactly what you mean. There are a lot of business owners out there who think planning is just not worth it, but there's that old project management mantra, isn't it? Failing to plan is planning to fail.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful statement. If you're in a position where you can sit down in front of a business owner and tell them that, look them in the eye and get them to respond to you, that's a powerful message.
Yeah. We're actually working with 2 clients at the moment who have had their eyes open big time, because they were very skeptical to start off with, and now they're absolutely sold on this business. And of course, what it's doing is it's pulling their whole team together, and they're all going in one direction as opposed to different directions.
Yeah.
I mean, the challenge is trying to get managing directors to really see the value of it when the proof of the pudding's in the eating. And it's not till they start doing it that they suddenly see the value. Now, how we persuade them to do that, I mean, I try my very best. That's where I go off networking, and I have this, I accept speaking engagements to really try and reach out to people and say, look, I've actually had millions of pounds worth of government money spent on my education to teach me how to do this. So to me, it's second nature, but I want to pass on that knowledge to other people.
Rich?
Yeah, so I'm interested in the opportunities around acquisition, and what you said about now could be a good time. Are there also additional dangers at the moment of looking towards acquisition?
I think there's always risk involved in acquisition, because the tradition when you're acquiring a business is to do legal and commercial due diligence. And that's great. You get a good look at the books, you get a good look at the contracts, you understand, yeah, the structures of this business are sound, and that's good. But actually, that's less than half of it. The issue is the people. Business is all about people, leadership. If you're not doing some kind of people due diligence or cultural due diligence as well, then it's really difficult. In my career, I've been both sides of the acquisition fence on a number of occasions. So I've been bought and been buying. And I've seen it done really well, but I've seen it done really badly. And when it's been done really badly, it's always because the people were not taken into account. Right. And in some sectors, it's the people that you're buying. You want the experience. You want those people to come in. And if you do it badly, and the minute that everybody comes across, they'll think, well, this is not a very good place to work, I'm off. But if you do it carefully, it's actually a very, very good way to develop and grow your business. And there are fantastic opportunities now because, as James said, you know, there are companies out there that aren't doing it very well, and they will become available. We're working with another client who are very much looking to go down this path. We need to do some things internally, foundationally first. Yep. But as soon as that's done, we will be out there looking, actively looking for targets. Yeah, definitely.
And don't underestimate the challenges of cultural change.
No.
Changing people. As Peter just mentioned, the leadership, it comes from the top. Always, always, always it comes from the top. And there's no right or wrong style of leadership. There's either successful leadership or failure leadership. And if you want to change a culture to the new acquired company culture, don't underestimate it. It's a challenge.
Use an engagement multiplier in HGKC. 10.
Tracy, you want something?
When I used to work for a local authority and I was managing director and set up a company, and I had a 10-year business plan. And so I held strongly to that because we were demonstrating success. But I think the shareholder at the time wanted to assert control and power. It still wanted a lot of the things that we were doing, but it didn't want that, and it wanted to tell you it wanted something different, but it didn't know what it wanted. And so how do you deal with that if you believe your plan is actually the right plan, but you've got somebody that's higher than you that has kind of more authority, that's kind of taking you in a different direction, but it's not a planned direction, it's not one where you can kind of get behind? How would you deal with that?
The metrics for me, really, I think it's about trying to get, in your case, the shareholder to agree what metrics they wanted to use to measure success, and then either showing them that your plan was delivering that, and if it wasn't, accepting that your plan needed to change. I've written plans that I thought were the best plans in the world, and I've had other people tell me that they thought otherwise. The reality is, and particularly now, the world is changing around us, so people's objectives do change. It's always hard work if you're an MD and having to battle with a shareholder who wants something different. But you know, metrics for me would be probably where I would start with that. What would you say, James?
Well, it sounds to me, Trace, as though they envied your success, and that, of course, happens often. And to me, the solution there is to stick to your guns and to prove that your 10-year plan is delivering exactly what you said, and challenge them to come after you. Mm-hmm. Because they can't. I was actually in a position where this happened, and somebody in a superior headquarters was trying to undermine our activities. And, you know, there are ways to solve it, but it's down to people and relationships. And again, I would say you have to talk to people and you have to challenge them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more? Any others?
Well, an observation more than a question, that because my background is comms, I was a comms director, so I share James's view on comms, but equally I think it's amazing that when they want to save money in an organisation, one of the first things that gets the red pen is comms and training, which is incredibly short-sighted. And I think small business owners are guilty of doing the same as well, is thinking, I can't afford to do that, when actually what they should be saying is, I can't afford not to.
I think the core of that is in planning as well, Sue, actually, because you're right. And I've been in companies before where we've gone into hard times and they've had to make cuts, and those are exactly the places that go every time. But one of the messages we've been putting out since the beginning of lockdown is that businesses have to find a way to continue to do business with each other. And because the world is changing, people are doing things differently, and that means opportunity. So before you make cuts, before you slash through marketing and training, understand what differences you have, what changes you could take advantage of, and then plan for those. And then you can start to evaluate. So as James said, there's that bit about capability. If you haven't done the vision first and you haven't done the initial planning first, you cannot possibly decide what capability you need. You might still make changes and make cuts, and businesses are, and they're doing so because they have no choice to do so. But I rather suspect there are a lot of businesses out there that are making cuts that in a week or month or maybe a little bit longer's time are going to be regretting doing so. Planning is always the answer.
Okay, thank you, Peter, and thank you, James. Certainly a very enlightening and informative session, and I've made copious notes that I'm going to take back, and I may even pinch some of the quotes that are in there for future meetings. So just to say thank you very much for giving us your time and for giving us the presentation.